May it please the tribunal, a document book has been prepared and filed, and the appropriate number of copies has been delivered to the defendants. We ask the tribunal's permission to file within the next few days a trial brief, which now is in the process of preparation. Our proof against the defendant Schacht is confined to planning and preparation of aggressive war.
What was it you said about the trial brief?
We ask permission to file a trial brief within the next few days, as our brief is not yet ready. Our proof against the defendant Schacht is limited to planning and preparation for aggressive war and to membership in a conspiracy for aggressive war. The extent of Schacht's criminal responsibility as a matter of law under the charter of the tribunal will be developed in our brief. Only a few of our 50-odd documents have been previously submitted in evidence. We have taken special pains to avoid repetition and cumulative proof. But for the sake of continuity, we would like, in several instances, simply to draw the tribunal's attention to evidence previously received with an appropriate reference to the transcript of the record. Before commencing our proof, we wish to state our understanding that the defendant Schacht's control over the German economy was on the wane after November 1937, and that by the time of the aggression on Poland, his official status had been reduced to that of minister without portfolio and personal advisor to Hitler. We know, too, that he is sometimes credited with opposition to certain of the more radical elements of the Nazi Party. And I further understand that at the time of capture by United States forces, he was under German detention in a prison camp, having been arrested by the Gestapo in July 1944. Be this as it may, our proof will show that at least up until the end of 1937, Schacht was the dominant figure in the rearming of Germany and in the economic planning and preparation for war. That without his work, the Nazis would not have been able to wring from their depressed economy the tremendous material requirements of armed aggression, and that Schacht contributed his efforts with full knowledge of the aggressive purposes which he was serving. The details of this proof will be presented in 4 parts. First, we will very briefly show that Schacht accepted the Nazi philosophy prior to 1933 and supported Hitler's rise to power. Second, proof of the contribution of Schacht to German rearmament and preparation for war will be submitted. This evidence will also be brief, since the facts in this respect are well known and have already been touched upon by Mr. Dodd in his presentation of the case on economic preparation for war. Third, we will show that Schacht assisted the Nazi conspiracy purposely and willingly, with knowledge of and sympathy for its illegal ends. And last, we will prove that Schacht's loss of power in the German government did not in any sense imply disagreement with the policy of aggressive war. We turn now to our proof that Schacht helped Hitler to power. Schacht met Goering for the first time in December 1930, and Hitler early in January 1931 at Goering's house. His impression of Hitler was favorable. I offer in evidence U.S. Exhibit number 615, consisting of an excerpt from a pre-trial interrogation of Schacht under date of 20 July 1945, and quote two questions and answers related to this meeting. Near the middle of the first page of the interrogation.
You've only given us the exhibit number. You haven't given us the other number.
This is an interrogation, sir, and it will not have a
got
document
number
number, but you will find it in your document book in the back, labeled Schacht Interrogation
Oh, yes.
of 20 July 1945. I quote from the middle of the first page, quote, question, what did he, that is Hitler, say? Answer, oh, ideas he expressed before, but it was full of will and spirit. And near the bottom of the page, quote, what was your impression at the end of that evening?
Well, that doesn't seem to me on my first page.
Near the bottom, sir.
The first page of the Schacht interrogation?
The first page of the Schacht interrogation.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I didn't know there was more than one. Yeah.
There will be several.
Yes, I see.
I quote near the bottom of the page, question, what was your impression at the end of that evening? Answer, I thought that Hitler was a man with whom one could cooperate. After this meeting, Schacht allied himself with Hitler, and at a crucial political moment in November 1932, he lent the prestige of his name, which was widely known in banking, financial, and business circles throughout the world, to Hitler's cause. I offer in evidence United States Exhibit number 616, consisting of excerpts from a pre-trial interrogation of Schacht on 17 October 1945. I wish to quote, beginning at the top of page 36 of this interrogation. This is the interrogation of 17 October at page 36. I may say that when I refer to the page numbers, I speak of the page of the document.
I've only got page 1 and page 915. Oh, I've got it now, yeah.
Quote, question. Yes, and at that time, referring to January 1931, you became a supporter, I take it, answer in the course, question, of Hitler's coming to power, answer, especially in the course of the years 1931 and 1932. And I quote further from the lower half of page 37 of the same interrogation. Quote, question. But what I mean, and to make it very brief indeed, did you lend the prestige of your name to help Hitler come to power? Answer. I have publicly stated that I expected Hitler to come to power for the first time that I remember in November 32. Close quote. I quote further, question, and you know, or perhaps you don't, that Goebbels in his diary records with great affection, answer, yes. Question, the help that you gave him at that time. Answer, yes, I know that. Question, November 1932. Answer, from the Kaiserhof to the Chancellery and back. Question, that's right. You have read that. Answer, yes. Question, and you don't deny that Goebbels was right. Answer, I think his impression was that was correct at that time. Close quote. I now refer the tribunal to this statement of Goebbels set forth in 2409A, P.S. The entire diary of Goebbels is in evidence as United States Exhibit Number 262. The entry I wish to read, which appears in 2409 APS, was made on 21 November 1932. Quote, in a conversation with Dr. Schacht, I assured myself that he absolutely represents our point of view. He is one of the few who accepts the Fuhrer's position entirely. Close the quote. It is believed that Schacht joined the party only in the sense that he allied himself with the cause. Dr. Franz Reuter, whose biography of Schacht was officially published in Germany in 1937, has stated that Schacht refrained from formal membership in order to be of greater assistance to the party. I offer in evidence EC 460, U.S. Exhibit Number 617, consisting of an excerpt from Reuter's biography. And I quote the last sentence of the excerpt. Quote, "By not doing so, at least until the final assertion and victory of the party, he was able to assist it, the party, much better than he would have been able to do had he become an official party member." Close quote. It was Schacht who organized the financial means for the decisive March 1933 election at a meeting of Hitler with a group of German industrialists in Berlin. Schacht acted as the sponsor or host of this meeting, and a campaign fund of several million marks was collected. Without reading therefrom, I offer in evidence EC 439, United States Exhibit 618, an affidavit of von Schnitzler under date of 10 November 1945, and refer the tribunal to the transcript for 23 November, pages 281 to 283, where the text of the affidavit already appears in the record. Further evidence on this point is also contained in the excerpt from the interrogation of Schacht on 20 July 1945, from which I read a part a moment ago. Schacht lent his support to Hitler not only because he was an opportunist, but also because he shared Hitler's ideological principles. Apart from the entry in Goebbels' diary, this may be seen from Schacht's own letter to Hitler under date of 29 August 1932, pledging continued support to Hitler after the latter's poor showing in the July 1932 elections. I offer this letter in evidence as EC 457, United States Exhibit Number 619, and quote from the middle of the first paragraph and further from the next to the last paragraph. Quote, "But what you could perhaps do with in these days is a word of most sincere sympathy. Your movement is carried internally by so strong a truth and necessity that victory in one form or another cannot elude you for long." And further down, "And keep in mind that neither Hitler nor Schacht was then in the German government, Schacht says, quote, "Wherever my work may take me in the near future, even if you should see me one day within the fortress, you can always count on me as your reliable assistant." Close quote.
What do those words mean at the top? The President of the Reichsbank in retirement. Are they on the letter?
They are, sir.
Is
He
it
had previously been, Dr. Schacht had previously been a president of the Reichsbank. At this time, he was in retirement. You remember this is prior to Hitler's accession to power.
Yes, fine.
And then Hitler reinstated Dr. Schacht as president of the Reichsbank after the Nazis had taken over.
And he put that at the top of his letter, did he?
That I cannot say. I will also point out that Schacht signed this letter, quote, "with a vigorous Heil," close quote. We turn now to the second part of our proof relating to Schacht's contribution to preparation for war. The detailed chronology of Schacht's official career in the Nazi government, as set forth in 3021 PS, has already been submitted in evidence as U.S. Exhibit number 11. However, it may be helpful at the outset to remind the tribunal that Schacht was recalled to the presidency of the Reichsbank by Hitler on 17 March 1933, which office he continuously held until 20 January 1939. That he was acting minister and then Minister of Economics from August 1934 until November 1937, and that he was appointed General Plenipotentiary for War Economy in May 1935. He resigned as Minister of Economics and General Plenipotentiary for War Economy in November 1937, when he accepted appointment as Minister without portfolio, which post he held until January 1943. His position as virtual economic dictator of Germany in the 4 crucial years from early 1933 to the end of 1936 is practically a matter of common knowledge. Schacht was the guiding genius behind the Nazi expansion of the German credit system for rearmament purposes. From the outset, he recognized that the plan for German military supremacy required huge quantities of public credit. To that end, a series of measures was adopted which subverted all credit institutions in Germany to the overall aim of supplying funds for the military machine. I will briefly mention some of these measures. By Cabinet decree on 27 October 1933, the statutory reserve of 40% in gold and foreign exchange required against circulating Reichsbank notes was permanently abandoned. By the Credit Act of 1934, the government assumed jurisdiction of all credit institutions, and control over the entire banking system was centralized in Schacht as chairman of the supervisory board for the credit system and as president of the Reichsbank. This act not only enables Schacht to control the quantity of credit, but also its use. On 29 March 1934, a system of forced corporate lending to the Reich was imposed on German business. And on 19 February 1935, the Treasury was authorized to borrow funds in any amounts approved by the Reich Chancellor, that is, by Hitler. On these points, I ask the tribunal to take judicial notice of Reichsgesetzblatt 1933, Part 2, page 827, Reichsgesetzblatt 1934, Part 1, page 1203, Reichsgesetzblatt 1934, Part 1, page 295, and Reichsgesetzblatt 1935, Part 1, page 198.
Are they found here in the document?
They're not in the document book, sir. I ask only that the judicial notice be taken of them as published laws of Germany. These measures enabled Schacht to embark upon what he himself has termed a, quote, daring credit policy, close quote, including the secret financing of a vast amount of armaments through the so-called MIFO bill, a description of which appears in the transcript for 23 November at page 295. I offer in evidence EC 436, United States Exhibit number 620, consisting of a statement dated 2 November 1945 by Emil Pohl, a director of the Reichsbank during Schacht's presidency, and quote the second paragraph thereof as follows. Quote, In the early part of 1935, the need for financing an accelerated rearmament program arose. Dr. Schacht, president of the Reichsbank, after considering various techniques of financing, proposed the use of MIFO bills to provide a substantial portion of the funds needed for the rearmament program. This method had as one of its primary advantages the fact that secrecy would be possible during the first years of the rearmament program, and figures indicating the extent of rearmament that would have become public through the use of other methods could be kept secret through the use of the MIFO bills. Close quote. The extent of the credit expansion and the importance of MIFO financing may be seen from EC number 419, which I now offer as United States Exhibit number 621. And which consists of a letter from Finance Minister von Krosigk to Hitler under date of 1 September 1938. I quote the following figures from the middle of the first page. Quote, the development of the Reich debt is as follows. As of December 31, 1932, funded debt 10.4 billions of Reichsmarks. Current debt 2.1 billions of Reichsmarks. Debt not subscribed to by the public, that is trade and MIFO bills of exchange, 0. As of June 30, 1938, funded debt 19 billion Reichsmarks. Current debt 3.5 billion Reichsmarks. And debt not subscribed to by the public, that is trade and MIFO bills of exchange, 13.3 billion Reichsmarks. Total, as of December 31, 1932, 12.5 billion Reichsmarks. As of June 30, 1938, 35.8 billion Reichsmarks. Close quote. The Reich debt thus tripled.
Would you read the next section, beginning with the word provisions were made to cover?
Provisions were made to cover the armament expenditures for the year 1938, the same amount as in 1937, close the parenthesis, as follows. 5 billions from the budget, that is taxes, 4 billions from loans, 2 billions from 6 months Treasury notes, which means postponement of payment until 1939. Total, 11 billions. The Reich debt thus tripled under Schacht's management. More than one-third of the total was financed secretly and through the instrumentality of the Reichsbank by MIFO and trade bills. It is clear that this amount of financing outside the normal public issues represented armament debt. I read further from EC 436 at the beginning of the last long paragraph. Quote, these MIFO bills were used exclusively for financing rearmament. And when, in March 1938, a new finance program discontinuing the use of MIFO bills was announced by Dr. Schacht, there was a total volume outstanding of 12 billion marks of MIFO bills which had been issued to finance rearmament. Close quote. The character of Schacht's credit policy and the fact that it was ruthlessly dedicated to the creation of armaments plainly appear from his own speech delivered on 29 November 1938. I offer it in evidence as EC 611, U.S. Exhibit number 622. And I quote from page 6 at the beginning of the last paragraph. Quote, it is possible that no bank of issue in peace times carried on such a daring credit policy as the Reichsbank since the seizure of power by National Socialism. With the aid of this credit policy, however, Germany created an armament second to none. And this armament, in turn, made possible the results of our policy. Close quote. Beyond the field of finance, Schacht assumed totalitarian control over the German economy generally, in order to marshal it behind the rearmament program. He acquired great power over industry as a result of the Nazi reorganization of German industry along military lines and in accordance with the so-called leadership principle. On this point, I refer the tribunal to the transcript for 23 November at pages 287 to 290, and to Reichsgesetzblatt 1934, Part 1, page 1194, of which the tribunal is asked to take judicial notice. Schacht also exercised broad powers as a member of the Reich Defense Council, which was secretly established on 4 April 1933, and the function of which was preparation for war. The tribunal is referred to the transcript for 23 November, page 290. I also offer in evidence EC 128, United States Exhibit Number 623, a report under date of 30 September 1934, showing the functions of the Ministry of Economics in this respect. The report reveals concentration upon all the familiar wartime economic problems, including stockpiling, production of scarce goods, removal of industry to secure areas, fuel and power supply for war production, machine tools, control of wartime priorities, rationing, price control, civilian supply, and so on. I wish to read into the record merely an excerpt showing the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Economics, beginning near the top of page 2. This is EC 128, and I read from the top of page 2. Quote, with the establishment of the Reich Defense Council and its permanent committee, the Reich Ministry of Economics has been given the task of making economic preparation for the conduct of the war. There should really be no need to explain the tremendous significance of this task. Everyone remembers how terribly the lack of any economic preparation for war avenged itself during the World War. Close quote. Finally, in 1934, Schacht acquired sweeping powers under legislation which authorized him, as Minister of Economics, to take any measure deemed necessary for the development of the German economy. In this connection, reference is made to Reichsgesetzblatt 1934, Part 1, page 565, of which the tribunal is asked to take judicial notice. The so-called new plan devised by Schacht was announced in the fall of 1934, shortly after he became Minister of Economics. In this connection, the tribunal is referred to Reichsgesetzblatt 1934, Part 1, page 816, and Reichsgesetzblatt 1935, Part 1, page 105, with the request that judicial notice be taken thereof. The new plan was Schacht's basic program for obtaining the necessary foreign-produced raw materials and foreign exchange required to sustain the rearmament program. With respect to the details of the new plan, I offer in evidence EC 437, United States Exhibit Number 624, consisting of an affidavit of Emil Poole, dated 7 November 1945. The entire text of this affidavit is pertinent. Therefore, permission is requested to submit the affidavit without reading therefrom, on condition that French and Russian translations be prepared and filed.
And German ones supplied too.
The original is in German, sir.
It is in German?
The original is in German.
Yes, but copies will be supplied too.
We'll supply copies. I wish to say that the original is in English, but the affidavit has already been translated into German.
Yes.
This affidavit, by a co-worker of Schacht, describes in detail the many ingenious and often ruthless devices he used, including negotiating the so-called standstill agreements, forcing payment in Reichsmarks of interest and amortization on debt incurred in foreign currency, using scrip and funding bonds for the same purpose, suspending service on foreign-held debt, blocking foreign-held marks, freezing foreign claims in Germany, eliminating unessential foreign expenditures, requisitioning German-held foreign exchange, subsidizing exports, issuing restricted marks, bartering under clearing agreements, licensing imports, and controlling all foreign exchange transactions to the end of favoring raw materials for armaments. The tribunal is also asked to take judicial notice of Reichsgesetzblatt 1934, page 997, Reichsgesetzblatt 1933, Part 1, page 349, and Reichsgesetzblatt 1937, Part 1, page 600, relating to the clearing bank the conversion bank, and the maturity of foreign loans, all of which decrees are mentioned in the affidavit. Schacht even went so far as to invest foreign-held Reichsmarks on deposit in German banks in rearmament notes, thus, as he put it, financing rearmament with the assets of his political opponents. Without reading therefrom, I refer your honors to PS 1168, United States Exhibit 37, being a memorandum from Schacht to Hitler, dated 3 May 1935, which already appears in the transcript on pages 412 to 413. Moreover, Schacht even resorted to capital punishment to prevent the loss of foreign exchange when frightened capital began to flee the country. In this connection, reference is made to the law against economic sabotage found in 1936 Reichsgesetzblatt, Part 1, page 999, of which the tribunal is asked to take judicial notice. Schacht took particular pride in the results which were accomplished under the stringent controls which he instituted under his new plan. I refer the tribunal to EC 611 in evidence as United States Exhibit number 622, consisting of Schacht's speech in Berlin on 29 November 1938. I wish to read into the record an excerpt from the top of page 10. Quote, "If there is anything remarkable about the new plan, it is again only the fact that German organization under National Socialist leadership succeeded in conjuring up in a very short time the whole apparatus of supervision of imports, direction of exports, and promotion of exports. The success of the new plan can be proved by means of a few figures. Calculated according to quantity, the import of finished products was throttled by 63% between 1934 and 1937. On the other hand, the import of ores was increased by 132%, of petroleum by 116%, of grain by 102%, and of rubber by 71%. Close quote. While President of the Reichsbank and Minister of Economics, Schacht acquired still another key position, that of General Plenipotentiary for the War Economy. He received this appointment from Hitler pursuant to the unpublished Reich Defense Law secretly enacted on 21 May 1935. This law is in evidence as 2261 PS. United States Exhibit number 24.
Say the number again, will you?
2261. It consists of a letter from von Blumberg dated 24 June 1935 to the chiefs of the Army, Navy, and Air Forces, together with copies of the Reich Defense Law and the Cabinet's memorandum relating thereto. Pertinent comments on and excerpts from this document appear in the transcript for 23 November at pages 278 and 292. I will simply state, therefore, that by virtue of this appointment, Schacht was put in complete charge, except for certain direct armament production under control of the War Ministry, in complete charge of economic planning and preparation for war in peacetime. And upon the outbreak of war, he was to be the economic czar of Germany with complete control over the activities of a number of key Reich ministries. Schacht appointed Voltat as his deputy and organized a staff to carry out his directives. In this connection, I offer in evidence excerpts from a pretrial interrogation of Schacht under date of 17 October 1945. This document is United States Exhibit 616. I wish to read into the record a question and answer found at the bottom of page 40 of the document.
Yes.
Quote, question. Let me ask you a general question. Do you take the responsibility as plenipotentiary for the war economy for the writings that were made and the actions that were done by Voltat and his assistants? Answer, I have to. Close quote. I also offer in evidence EC 258, United States Exhibit number 625, consisting of a status report issued in December 1937 under the signature of Schacht's deputy, Boltot. The report is entitled, quote, "The Preparation of the Economic Mobilization by the Plenipotentiary for the War Economy," close quote. Schacht had withdrawn from office immediately prior to the preparation of this report, and it plainly is a recapitulation of his accomplishments while in office. Since the entire text is relevant, we ask permission to submit the document without reading therefrom, on condition that translations into French and Russian be later filed with the tribunal.
I don't think this is consistent with the rule laid down by the tribunal, which was that the translations in the French language and the Russian language should be submitted at the same time. You're now going to suggesting that you can submit translations at a later stage.
Well, if the court please, in any event, I didn't plan to read from the document at this time, and a defense counsel do have the German original.
Yes, I wasn't speaking of the defense counsel so much as the members of the tribunal.
We have the
French
Russian translation in process now, and it was delayed, and we were unable to get it here at this time. But the delay will be very short, and the document is of critical importance to our case. The alternative
How long will it be before it is ready?
I wouldn't like to say precisely, sir, but perhaps within 4 or 5 days.
What did you propose to do now? Because it's a very complicated and long document, is it not?
It is, and it shows...
Well, are we proposing to summarize it?
I was proposing to summarize it, sir, now.
Well, the tribunal thinks that if you would summarize it now and only be permitted to put it in at the stage when you have the translation ready. You may summarize it now.
I'll summarize it now, sir. This document discloses that before his resignation...
Will it take long to summarize?
Not very long, sir, no.
You see, it's 5 o'clock.
I think there will be time to summarize it, and then we'll stop.
Very well.
This document discloses that before his resignation, Schacht had worked out in amazing detail his plans and preparations for the management of the economy in the forthcoming war. For example, 180,000 industrial plants in 300 industries had been surveyed with respect to usefulness for war purposes. Economic plans for the production of 200 basic materials had been worked out. A system for letting war contracts had been devised. Allocations of coal, motor fuel, and power had been determined. 248 million Reichsmarks had already been spent on storage facilities alone. Evacuation plans for war materials and skilled workers from military zones had been worked out. 80 million wartime ration cards had already been printed and distributed to local areas. And a card index on the skills of some 22 million workers had been prepared. That concludes the summary, Your Honor. We'll stop here.
We adjourn now.
If the tribunal please, before picking up our line of proof against the defendant Schacht, I would like to supply a point of information. Yesterday, the president of the tribunal inquired with respect to EC 457, United States Exhibit 619. The question raised by the tribunal was with respect to the words "in retirement" in the letterhead used by Schacht in writing to Hitler in 1932. This is the letter in which Schacht expressed his belief in the truth of the Nazi movement, and in which he said that Hitler could always count upon him as a reliable assistant. The letterhead has printed upon it the President of the Reichsbank. And after that phrase, there is typed the letters AD. And I understand that those letters are an abbreviation for a German phrase meaning "in retirement," and that it is customary, or it was customary in Germany, for retired officials to continue to use their titles with the letters AD. Yesterday, we had just about completed our proof with respect to the contribution of the defendant Schacht to the preparation for war. And I wish to submit one more document on this point. This is EC 451, United States Exhibit 626. It consists of a statement by George S. Messerschmitt, United States Consul General in Berlin, 1930 to 1934. I will quote therefrom, beginning with the second sentence in the fourth paragraph. Quote, "It was his, Schacht's, financial ability that enabled the Nazi regime in the early days to find the financial basis for the tremendous armament program, and which made it possible to carry it through. If it had not been for his efforts, and this is not a personal observation of mine only, but I believe was shared and is shared by every observer at the time, the Nazi regime would have been unable to maintain itself in power and to establish its control over Germany, much less to create the enormous war machine which was necessary for its objectives in Europe and later throughout the world. The increased industrial activity in Germany, incident to rearmament, made great imports of raw materials necessary, while at the same time exports were decreasing. Yet by Schacht's resourcefulness, his complete financial ruthlessness, and his absolute cynicism, Schacht was able to maintain and to establish the situation of the Nazis. Unquestionably, without this complete lending of his capacities to the Nazi government and all of its ambitions, it would have been impossible for Hitler and the Nazis to develop an armed force sufficient to permit Germany to launch an aggressive war. Close quote. We turn now.
Well, Lieutenant Bryson, I'm not sure that gives a full or quite fair interpretation of the document. Don't you think perhaps you ought to read the paragraph before?
The preceding paragraph, sir?
Yes.
Quote, Dr. Schacht always attempted to play both sides of the fence. He told me, and I know he told both other American representatives in Berlin and various British representatives, that he disapproved of practically everything the Nazis were doing. I recall on several occasions his saying, after the Nazi Party came into power, that if the Nazis were not stopped, they were going to ruin Germany and the rest of the world with it. I recall distinctly that he emphasized to me that the Nazis were inevitably going to plunge Europe into war. Close quote. If the court please, I would like to read also from the last paragraph. Quote, in my opinion, Schacht was in no sense a captive of the Nazis. He was not compelled to devote his time and his capacities to their interests. His situation was such that he would most likely have been able either to work on a much less restrained scale or to abstain from activity entirely. He continued to lend his services to the Nazi government out of opportunism. Close quote. We turn now to the third part of our case against Schacht. The evidence is clear that he willingly contributed his efforts to the Nazi conspiracy, knowing full well its aggressive designs. The tribunal will recall our proof that Schacht was converted to the Nazi philosophy in 1931 and helped Hitler come to power in 1933. We will now prove, first, that Schacht personally favored aggression, and second, that in any event, he knew Hitler's aggressive intentions. There is ample evidence to justify the conclusion that Schacht rearmed Germany in order to see fulfilled his strong belief in aggressive expansion as an instrument of German national policy. Schacht had long been a German nationalist and expansionist. He spoke against the Treaty of Versailles at Stuttgart as early as 1927. I offer in evidence EC 415, United States Exhibit 627, consisting of a collection of excerpts from speeches by Schacht. I quote from the top of page 2. Quote, "The Versailles Dictate cannot be an eternal document because not only its economic but also its spiritual and moral premises are wrong." Close quote. It is common knowledge that he strongly favored acquisition of colonial territory by Germany. However, he also favored acquisition of contiguous territory in Europe. On 16 April 1929, at the Paris Conference in connection with reparations,
Are you going to read the passage that follows that at a later stage?
At a later stage, if you please.
Oh, very well.
In connection with another point.
Go on.
On 16 April 1929, at the Paris Conference in connection with reparations, he said, "Germany can generally only pay if the corridor and Upper Silesia will be handed back to Germany from Polish possession, and if besides, somewhere on earth, colonial territory will be made available to Germany."
Where you quote me
I will offer, sir. I offer in evidence United States Exhibit number 628, consisting of excerpts from a pretrial interrogation of Schacht on 24 August 1945.
Where is it? Here, soldier.
You'll find it in the document book in the back, labeled Interrogation of 24 August. At the top of the first page of the interrogation, this statement was quoted to Schacht, and his reply contains an admission of having made the statement. In his reply, he said, quote, "That Germany could not pay at the time after I made the statement has been proved, and that Germany will not be able to pay after this war will be proved in the future." Close quote. I wish to point out that this is the very territory which was the subject of the armed aggression in September 1939. In 1935, Schacht stated flatly that Germany would, if necessary, acquire colonies by force. I offer in evidence EC 450, designated as United States Exhibit number 629. This document consists of an affidavit of S.R. Fuller, Jr., together with a transcript of his conversation with Schacht at the American Embassy in Berlin on 23 September 1935. I wish to read from page 6 of the document. Where there appears a statement by Schacht in the lower half of the page.
What was the date of the conversation?
The conversation occurred on 23 September 1935. I quote from page 6. Quote, Schacht. Colonies are necessary to Germany. We shall get them through negotiations if possible. But if not, we shall take them.
On page 6.
Your Honor, please, the page number is at the bottom of the page and not at the top.
On page 6. Oh, I see. I beg your pardon. There are 2 pages.
Okay.
I see.
Shall I read it again, sir?
Yes, I've got it.
Yeah. In July 1936, when the rearmament program was well underway, Schacht again publicly spoke of the Versailles Treaty. This time, his language contained an explicit threat of war. I refer the tribunal again to EC 415, which I have previously introduced in evidence as U.S. Exhibit 627, consisting of a collection of speeches by Schacht. I wish to read from the paragraph beginning in the middle of the first page. Quote, but the memory of war weighs undiminished upon the people's minds. That is because deeper than material wounds, moral wounds are smarting, inflicted by the so-called peace treaties. Material loss can be made up through renewed labor, but the moral wrong which has been inflicted upon the conquered peoples in the peace dictates leaves a burning scar on the people's conscience. The spirit of the Versailles has perpetuated the fury of war, and there will not be a true peace, progress, or reconstruction until the world desists from this spirit. The German people will not tire of pronouncing this warning. Close quote. Later in the same year, Schacht publicly advocated the doctrine of Lebensraum for the German people. I quote again from EC 415, United States Exhibit number 627, being an excerpt from Schacht's speech at Frankfurt on 9 December 1936. On the second page, the last paragraph. Quote, Germany has too little living space for her population. She has made every effort, and certainly greater efforts than any other nation, to extract from her own existing small space whatever is necessary for the securing of her livelihood. However, in spite of all these efforts, the space does not suffice. Close quote. In January 1937, Schacht, in a conversation with Ambassador Davies, at least by inference, threatened a breach of the peace in demanding a colonial cession. I offer in evidence L-111, being U.S. Exhibit 630, and consisting of excerpts from a report under date of 20 January 1937 by Ambassador Davies to the Secretary of State. I wish to read therefrom, beginning with the second sentence of the second paragraph. Quote, he, meaning Schacht, stated the following: that the present condition of the German people was intolerable, desperate, and unendurable. That he had been authorized by his government to submit proposals to France and England which would, 1, guarantee European peace, 2, secure present European international boundaries, 3, reduce armaments, 4, establish a new form of a workable League of Nations, 5, abolish sanctions with new machinery for joint administration, all based upon a colonial cession that would provide for Germany an outlet for population, source for foodstuffs, fats, and raw materials. Close quote. In December 1937, Ambassador Dodd noted in his diary that Schacht would be willing to risk war for the sake of new territory in Europe. I refer the tribunal to EC 461, consisting of excerpts from Ambassador Dodd's diary. It was here. I turn now to EC 461, consisting of excerpts from Ambassador Dodd's diary. The entire diary has previously been received in evidence as United States Exhibit number 58. I quote some notes on a conversation with Schacht on 21 December 1937. Beginning near the bottom of the second page of EC 461, in the last paragraph. Quote, Schacht meant what the army chiefs of 1914 meant when they invaded Belgium, expecting to conquer France in 6 weeks. That is, domination and annexation of neighboring little countries, especially north and east. Much as he dislikes Hitler's dictatorship, he, as most other eminent Germans, wishes annexation without war if possible, with war if the United States will keep hands off. Close quote.
Another passage in that diary, not sure, it probably isn't to the same date, but it's on the first page of the exhibit, I think. The third paragraph.
The third paragraph.
Is it at a different time?
It is a different time, sir.
How September the 19th of what year?
We'll check that in the complete volume here. And I think in a minute I'll be able to supply the date.
Yes.
In the meantime, would you like me to read it, sir?
Yes, I think you better read it.
Quote, he then acknowledged that the Hitler Party is absolutely committed to war. And the people, too, are ready and willing. Only a few government officials are aware of the dangers and are opposed. He concluded, quote, "But we shall postpone it 10 years. Then it may be we can avoid war," close quote.
Well, I think you should read the next paragraph, too.
And to continue, quote, "I reminded him of his Bad Eilson speech some 2 weeks ago and said, I agree with you about commercial and financial matters in the main. But why do you not, when you speak before the public, tell the German people they must abandon a war attitude?" He replied, quote, "I dare not say that. I can only speak on my special subjects." Close quote.
And the next one.
And the next one. Quote, "How then can German people ever learn the real dangers of war if nobody ever presents that side of the question?" He once more emphasized his opposition to war and added that he had used his influence with Hitler, quote, "a very great man," close quote, he interjected, "to prevent war." I said, the German papers printed what I said at Bremen.
Too fast.
I beg your pardon. The German papers printed what I said at Bremen about commercial relations between our countries, but not a word about the terrible effects and barbarism of war. He acknowledged that and talked very disapprovingly of the propaganda ministry, which suppresses everything it dislikes. He added as I was leaving, quote, "You know, a party comes into office by propaganda and then cannot disavow it or stop it," close quote. The date of this conversation was in September 1934.
1934?
1934.
Yes. It's a pity that those years are not stated in the document. It's rather misleading as it is.
Court, please, the exhibit which is in evidence will show the dates.
Yes, I'm not blaming you, but it is misleading. Because it looks like September the 19th and December the 21st. And as there were 3 years interval between, it makes a difference. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, that is not 3 years, sir. Yes, that's right. But I'm sorry, the excerpt simply shows the page numbers from the exhibit and not the dates. Schacht admittedly strained all the resources of Germany to build up a Wehrmacht which would provide Hitler with an instrument for realization of his desire for Lebensraum. In this connection, I offer in evidence EC 369, United States Exhibit number 631, consisting of a memorandum from the Reichsbank Directorate signed by Schacht to Hitler, dated 7 January 1939. I wish to read the last paragraph of the first page. Quote, "From the beginning, the Reichsbank has been aware of the fact that a successful foreign policy can be attained only by the reconstruction of the German armed forces. It, the Reichsbank, therefore assumed to a very great extent the responsibility to finance the rearmament in spite of the inherent dangers to the currency. The justification thereof was the necessity which pushed all other considerations into the background to carry through the armament at once, out of nothing, and furthermore under camouflage, which made a respect-commanding foreign policy possible. Close quote. It is clear that the, quote, successful foreign policy, close quote, which Schacht thus attributed to rearmament, included the Austrian and Czechoslovakian acquisitions. I offer in evidence EC 297A, United States Exhibit 632, being a speech of Schacht in Vienna after the Anschluss in March 1939. I quote from the third page and the second full paragraph. Quote, "Thank God, these things could, after all, not hinder the great German people on their way, for Adolf Hitler has created a communion of German will and German thought. He bolstered it up with the newly strengthened Wehrmacht, and he then finally gave the external form to the internal union between Germany and Austria." Close quote. With respect to the Sudetenland, I refer the tribunal to EC 611, already in evidence as United States Exhibit number 622, being a speech by Schacht, EC 611.
Yes.
But I will not read from it, sir. Being a speech by Schacht on 29 November 1938, shortly after the Munich settlement. I have earlier read the pertinent remark attributing Hitler's success at that conference to the rearmament made possible by Schacht's financial and economic measures.
EC 611, she's going to read it. Been read before.
This line of proof shows that Schacht entertained an aggressive philosophy with respect to territorial expansion and justifies the conclusion that he allied himself with Hitler because of their common viewpoint. We turn now to proof that whether or not Schacht wanted war, he at least knew Hitler planned military aggression, for which he was creating the means. He had numerous discussions with Hitler from 1933 to 1937. He knew that Hitler was intent upon expansion to the east, which would mean war, and that Hitler felt he must present the German people with a military victory. I offer in evidence United States Exhibit 633, consisting of an excerpt from a pretrial interrogation of Schacht on 13 October 1945. And I read from the second page at the end of the second question. Quote, question. What was there in what he, meaning Hitler, said that led you to believe he was intending to move towards the east? Answer, that is in Mein Kampf. He never spoke to me about that, but it was in Mein Kampf.
Both my... perhaps this is meant for the 13th of October?
This is 13th of October, the second page, and at the end of the second question.
Yes, I've got it.
Quote, what was there in what he, meaning Hitler, said that led you to believe he was intending to move towards the east? Answer, that is in Mein Kampf. He never spoke to me about that, but it was in Mein Kampf. Question, in other words, as a man who read it, you understood that Hitler's expansion policy was directed to the east. Answer, to the east. Close quote. I also offer in evidence EC 458.
To read the next question and answer.
To continue from the interrogation of 13 October, quote, question. And you thought that it would be better to try to divert Hitler from any such intention and to urge upon him a colonial policy instead? Answer, quite. Close quote. I also offer in evidence EC 458. United States Exhibit number 634. Consisting of an affidavit of Major Edmund Tilley under date of 21 November 1945 with respect to an interview of Schacht on 9 July 1945. I read the second paragraph. Quote, during the course of the discussion, Schacht stated to me that he had had numerous talks with Hitler from 1933 to 1937. Schacht stated that from these talks, he had formed the impression that in order to make his hold and government secure, the Fuhrer felt that he must present the German people with a military victory. Close quote. As early as 1934, Schacht stated his belief that the Nazis would bring war to Europe. I refer the tribunal to EC 451, which I have already submitted in evidence as United States Exhibit 626, consisting of an affidavit under date of 15 November 1945 by Messerschmitt, American Consul General in Berlin, 1930 to 1934. I wish to read from the first page, third paragraph, last sentence.
You've read it already.
court please, there's a little more there which we have not read, which I should like to read.
You read the whole paragraph.
Um,
At our invitation, you read from the third paragraph down to the bottom of the page.
I should like to read the first sentence of the fourth paragraph on page 1.
Oh. All right.
Quote, while making these protestations, he nevertheless showed by his acts that he was thoroughly an instrument of the whole Nazi program and ambitions, and that he was lending all his extraordinary knowledge and resourcefulness towards the accomplishment of that program. Close quote.
Mr. Bryson, speaking for myself and for some other members of the tribunal, we think it is a far better way to deal with a document, to deal with it, if possible, once and for all, and not to be coming back to it. It not only wastes time by the fact that the tribunal have got to turn back and forth to the document, but you get a much fairer idea of the document if it's dealt with once and for all, although it may cover more than one subject. I say that for the... it may be impossible for you to do that now in conscience of the preparation that you've made, but those who follow you may be able to alter their course so that if it's possible, when you get a document with a variety or a number of paragraphs in it which you want to quote, that you should quote them all at the same time if possible. Do you follow what I mean?
I follow you, Your Honor. We have so organized our materials that we have directed our evidence to specific points, and since the points are separated, we've had to separate our quotations.
I realize that it may be difficult for you.
In September of 1934, Ambassador Dodd made a record in his diary of a conversation with Sir Eric Phipps at the British Embassy in Berlin. If the court please, I will pass over this document because in response to a question from the tribunal, I read an excerpt from the document which covers the same point.
Go on, Lieutenant Bryson.
I had just pointed out that Schacht had acknowledged to Ambassador Dodd in September 1934 his knowledge of the war purposes of the Nazi Party. And we had already shown that in 1935, Schacht had stated that Germany would, if necessary, acquire colonies by force. He must then have known to what length Hitler was prepared to go. After attending a meeting of the Reichsministers on 27 May 1936 in Berlin, Schacht must have known that Hitler was contemplating war. Your Honors may recall, as has been earlier shown, that at this meeting, the defendant Goering, who was very close to Hitler, stated that all measures are to be considered from the standpoint of an assured waging of war, and that waiting for new methods is no longer appropriate. I refer the tribunal to 1301 PS, from which I will not read, as the quotation is already in evidence in United States Exhibit number 123. On 31 August 1936, the War Minister von Blumberg sent to Schacht a copy of von Blumberg's letter to the defendant Goering. I refer the tribunal again to 1301 PS, previously submitted in evidence as United States Exhibit 123, and read from the middle of page 19 of the document. The page numbers, if the court please, on this document are found in the upper left-hand corner. Quote, according to an order of the Fuhrer, the setting up of all Air Force units is to be completed on 1 April 1937. Therefore, considerable expenditures have to be made in 1936, which at the time that the budget for 1936 was made were planned for later years only. This intensification of the Air Force program certainly revealed to Schacht the closeness to war which Hitler must have felt. I also offer in evidence EC 416, United States Exhibit number 635, consisting of minutes of the Cabinet meeting of 4 September 1936, which Schacht attended. I read a statement by Goering found at the top of page 2 of this document. Quote, the Fuhrer and Reichskanzler has given a memorandum to the Colonel General and the Reich War Minister, which represents a general instruction. It starts from the basic thought that the showdown with Russia is inevitable. Close quote. Schacht thus knew that Hitler expected war with Russia. He also knew of Hitler's ambitions towards the East. It must have been plain to him, therefore, that such a war would result from Russian opposition to German military expansion in that direction. That is, Schacht must have known that it would be a war of German aggression. In January 1937, the tribunal will recall, Schacht stated to Ambassador Davies in Berlin that he had, quote, been authorized by his government, close quote, to submit certain proposals to France and England, which in fact amounted to a bid for colonies under threat of war. If Schacht was acting under instructions from Hitler, he was necessarily familiar with Hitler's aggressive intention at that time. In November of 1937, Schacht knew Hitler was determined to acquire Austria and at least autonomy for the Germans of Bohemia, and that Hitler also had designs on the Polish corridor. I refer the tribunal to L151, already in evidence as United States Exhibit number 70. This being a letter containing a memorandum of a conversation between Schacht and Ambassador Bullock, dated 23 November 1937. I quote the last paragraph on page 2. Quote, Hitler was determined to have Austria eventually attached to Germany and to obtain at least autonomy for the Germans of Bohemia. At the present moment, he was not vitally concerned about the Polish corridor, and in his, Schacht's opinion, it might be possible to maintain the corridor provided Danzig were permitted to join East Prussia and provided some sort of a bridge could be built across the corridor uniting Danzig and East Prussia with Germany. Close quote. To digress for just a moment, Schacht here was really speaking for himself as well as for Hitler. We have seen from his speech of 29 March 1938 in Vienna his enthusiasm for the Anschluss after the event. He was even then working hard for its achievement. In this connection, I refer the tribunal to pages 506 to 507 of the transcript for evidence of Schacht's having subsidized the Nazi preliminary agitation in Austria. In addition to the foregoing direct evidence, the tribunal is asked to take into consideration the fact that to such a man as Schacht, the events of the period certainly bespoke Hitler's intentions. Schacht was a close collaborator of Hitler and a member of the cabinet during the period of the Nazi agitation in Austria, the introduction of conscription, the march into the Rhineland, the overthrow of the Republican government in Spain, the ultimate conquest of Austria, and the acquisition of the Sudetenland by a show of force. During this period, the Reich's debt tripled under the stress of mounting armaments, the expenditures for which rose from 3/4 of a billion Reichsmarks in 1932 to 11 billion Reichsmarks in 1937 and 14 billion Reichsmarks in 1938. During the entire period, 35 billion Reichsmarks were spent on armaments. It was a period in which the burning European foreign policy issue was the satisfaction of Germany's repeated demands for additional territory. Hitler, committed to a policy of expansion, was taking great risks in foreign policy and laying the greatest stress upon utmost speed in preparation for war. Certainly in this setting, Schacht did not proceed in ignorance of the fact that he was assisting Hitler and Germany along the road towards armed aggression. We turn now to our last line of proof. With respect to Schacht's loss of power in the Hitler regime. In November 1937, Schacht resigned his offices as Minister of Economics and General Plenipotentiary for the war economy. At that time, he accepted appointment as minister without portfolio, and he also continued as president of the Reichsbank. Our evidence will show, A, this change in position was no more than a clash between two power-seeking personalities, Goering and Schacht, in which Goering, being closer to Hitler, won out. B, their policy differences were concerned only with the method of rearming. And C, Schacht's loss of power in no sense implies an unwillingness to assist armed aggression. There was an issue of policy between Goering and Schacht, but it was concerned only with the method and not the desirability of war preparations. Schacht emphasized foreign trade as a necessary source of rearmament materials during the transitory period until Germany should be ready to strike. Goering was a proponent of complete self-sufficiency. Hitler supported Goering, and Schacht, his pride wounded and bitterly resenting Goering's intrusion in the economic field, finally stepped out. I refer the tribunal to 1301 PS, previously submitted in evidence as United States Exhibit number 123, containing notes of a conversation between Schacht and Thomas on 2 September 1936. These are found on page 21 of the document. From which I quote, President Schacht called me to him at 1300 today and requested me to forward the following to the Minister of War. Schacht returned from the Fuhrer with the greatest anxiety, since he could not agree to the economic program planned by the Fuhrer. The Fuhrer wants to speak at the party convention about economic policy and wants to emphasize there that we now want to get free with all our energy from foreign countries by production in Germany. Schacht requests urgently that the Reich Minister of War warn the Fuhrer from this step. And 3 paragraphs further down, quote, if we now shout out our decision abroad to make ourselves economically independent, then we cut our own throats, because we can no longer survive the necessary transitory period, close quote. Nevertheless, Hitler announced the 4-year plan of self-sufficiency a few days later in Nuremberg. And against Schacht's wishes, Goering was named plenipotentiary of the four-year plan. At this point, I refer the tribunal again to the interrogation of Schacht on 16 October 1945, being United States Exhibit number 636. And I wish to read, beginning near the bottom of page 9 of the document. Quote, question, and the 4 years plan came in when? Answer, it was announced in September 36 on the party day. Question, do you say that from the time that the 4-year plan came in September 1936, you were all ready to rid yourself of your economic duty? Answer, no. At that time, I thought that I might maintain my position even against Goering. Question, yes, in what sense? Answer, that he would not interfere with affairs which I had to manage in my ministry. Question, as a matter of fact, his appointment was not met with favor by you. Answer, I would not have appointed a man like Goering who didn't understand a bit about all these things. Close quote. Schacht and Goering immediately became embroiled in a conflict of jurisdiction. On 26 November 1936, Goering issued a directive regarding raw and synthetic material production. I offer in evidence EC 243, United States Exhibit number 637, consisting of a copy of this directive. It shows that Goering's office for raw and synthetic materials preempted control over large economic areas previously in the hands of Schacht. As an example, I will quote from paragraph 5 of the directive on page 4 of the document. Quote, the planning and determination of objectives, as well as the control over the execution of the tasks which must be accomplished within the framework of the 4-year plan, and are the responsibility of the Office for German Raw and Synthetic Materials, which supersedes the authorities which have heretofore been in charge of these tasks. Close quote. On 11 December 1936, Schacht found it necessary to order all supervisory offices in the Ministry of Economics to accept instructions from him alone. I offer in evidence EC 376, United States Exhibit number 638, consisting of a circular letter from Schacht to all supervisory offices under date of 11 December 1936. And I quote from the second paragraph. Quote, the supervisory offices are obliged to accept instructions from me alone. They must answer all official inquiries of the Office for German Raw Materials in order to give any information at any time to the fullest extent. And a little further down, quote, I herewith authorize the supervisory offices to take the necessary measures for themselves. In case doubts should result from requests of the above offices, and these doubts cannot be removed by oral negotiations with the specialized workers of that office, I should immediately be informed. I will then order, in each case, the necessary steps to be taken. Close quote. The military sided with Schacht, who had rearmed them so well. I offer in evidence EC 420, United States Exhibit number 639, consisting of a draft of a memorandum by the Military Economic Staff dated 19 December 1936. I wish to read from paragraph number 1. Quote, 1. The control of war economy in the civilian sector in case of war is possible only for that person who, in peacetime, has made preparations for war under his own responsibility. Upon recognizing this fact, a year and a half ago, Reichsbank President Dr. Schacht was appointed Plenipotentiary General for War Economy, and an operations staff was attached to his office. Close quote. And then from paragraph number 2, quote, the military economy staff does not deem it compatible with the principle laid down in number 1, paragraph 1, if the Plenipotentiary General for War Economy is now placed under the Minister-President, Colonel General Goering's command. Close quote. In January 1937, the Military Weekly Gazette published an article warmly praising Schacht's achievements in rearmament. Without reading, I offer in evidence EC 383, United States Exhibit number 640, containing this article, a pertinent quotation from which already appears in the transcript for 23 November at page 296. Shortly thereafter, Schacht attempted to force a showdown with Goering by temporarily refusing to act in his capacity as plenipotentiary. I offer in evidence EC 244, United States Exhibit number 641, consisting of a letter from von Blumberg, the Minister of War, to Hitler under date of February 22, 1937. I read the second paragraph of this letter as follows, quote, the President, Dr. Schacht, has notified me that he is not acting in his capacity as plenipotentiary for the time being, since, in his opinion, there is existing a conflict between the powers conferred upon him and those of Colonel General Goering. Because of this, the preparatory mobilization steps in the economic field are delayed. Close quote. Schacht obviously was using his importance to the war preparations as a lever.
Lieutenant Bryson, does the defendant Schacht admit in his interrogation that the reason for his giving up his office was the difference of opinion between him and the defendant Goering?
He does, sir, and the defendant Goering so states in his interrogations.
Well, is it necessary in those circumstances to go into the details of the quarrel?
Well, if the court will be satisfied that this was the cause of Schacht's resignation,
Well, if they both say so.
and that the cause was not his unwillingness to go along with the aggressive intentions of the Nazis at that time, I'll be perfectly satisfied to confine our evidence to interrogations of Schacht.
Does
and
he
Goering.
suggest that in his interrogation, that might have been the reason?
Not to my knowledge, sir. But our case against Schacht is premised on conspiracy. And,
If the defendant Schacht was to set up such a case as that, you could apply to be heard in rebuttal.
well, we will be satisfied then to eliminate a number of our items of evidence continuing this controversy between Schacht and Goering and satisfy ourselves with the interrogations.
Yes.
If the court please, we're almost at the time of the break.
Oh, yes.
Perhaps during the break we can arrange our evidence.
Yes, we'll adjourn now for 10 minutes.
From the last paragraph on page 3, the second sentence. Quote, "We are, however, faced with the fact that approximately 3 billion Reichsmarks of such acceptances cannot now be paid, though they will be due in 1939. Close quote. I quote further from the upper half of page 4.
Did you say page 3? It's page 5, I think. In our copy.
In my copy of the document, sir, it's the bottom of page 3, using the numbers at the bottom of the page, the last paragraph, the second sentence.
Oh, I thought you'd been reading the paragraph being, "We are convinced."
We're coming to that, sir. We quote
see.
from 3 places in this document.
Yes, on page 3 at the bottom. "We are, however, faced with the fact." Is that it?
That is right, sir.
Very well.
It'll be unnecessary to read it again, I take it.
Yes.
I quote further from the upper half of page 4. Exclusive of the Reichsbank, there are approximately 6 billion Reichsmarks, MIFO acceptance bills, which can be discounted against cash payment at any time at the Reichsbank, which fact represents a continuous danger to the currency. Close quote. And I quote finally from the concluding paragraph of the memorandum. Quote, "We are convinced that the effects on the currency caused by the policy of the last 10 months can be mended, and that the danger of inflation again can be eliminated by strict maintenance of balanced budget. The Führer and the Reich Chancellor himself has publicly rejected again and again an inflation as foolish and fruitless. We therefore ask the following measures. 1. The Reich, as well as all the other public offices, must not incur expenditures or assume guarantees and obligations that cannot be covered by taxes, or by those funds which can be raised through loans without disturbing the long-term investment market. 2, in order to carry out these measures effectively, full financial control over all public expenditures must be restored to the Reichsminister of Finance. 3, the price and wage control must be rendered effective. The existing mismanagement must be eliminated. 4, the use of the money and investment market must be at the sole discretion of the Reichsbank. Close quote. It is clear that Schacht's fear was genuine and is a complete explanation of his departure from the scene. He had good reason to be afraid. In fact, the finance minister had already recognized the situation in September 1938. I refer the tribunal to EC 419, United States Exhibit 621, which I have already submitted in evidence, and which consists of a letter under date of 1 September 1938 from Krosigk to Hitler, in which Krosigk warns of an impending financial crisis. I quote from the bottom of page 2.
Isn't that really cumulative of what you've already read?
We'll be glad to skip it, sir. It is cumulative. Schacht was not only afraid of a financial crisis, but he was afraid that he would be personally held responsible for it. I offer in evidence an affidavit of Emil Poole, a director of the Reichsbank and co-worker of Schacht, dated 8 November 1945, designated as EC 438, United States Exhibit number 646. And I read therefrom, beginning at the bottom of the second page. Quote, when Schacht saw that the risky situation which he had sponsored was becoming insoluble, he was more and more anxious to get out. This desire to get out of a bad situation was for a long time the leitmotif of Schacht's conversation with the directors of the bank. Close quote. In the end, Schacht escaped by deliberately stimulating his dismissal from the presidency of the Reichsbank. I offer in evidence United States Exhibit number 647, consisting of excerpts from an interrogation of von Krosigk under date of 24 September 1945, and I wish to read several statements beginning at the very bottom of the second page. Quote, I asked Mr. Schacht to finance the Reich before the ultimo of the month the sum of 100 or 200 millions. It was this quite usual procedure which we had used for years and years. And we used to give back this money after a couple of days. Schacht this time refused and said that he was not willing to finance a penny because he wanted that, as he said, it should be made clear to Hitler that the Reich was bankrupt. I tried to explain that this was not the proper ground to discuss the whole question of financing, because the question of financing very small sums for a few days during the Ultimo never would bring Hitler to the conviction that the whole financing was impossible. As far as I remember now, it was Funk who told Hitler something about this conversation. Then Hitler asked Schacht to call upon him. I do not know what they said, but the result certainly was the dismissal of Schacht. Close quote.
Just give me the reference to that document again, where you were reading from.
This is the interrogation of von Krosigk under date of 24 September 1945. I wish to read further, continuing on page 3. Question. Now, did Schacht ever say anything to you to the effect that he wanted to resign because he was in opposition to the continuance of the rearmament program? Answer. No, he never said it in this specific form, but in some conversations, he certainly said several times, in his own way, that he had conflict with Goering, and anger with Dar, so that I didn't take these things very seriously. Question. Well, let me put it this way, and please think carefully about this. Did Schacht ever say that he wanted to resign because he realized that the extent of the rearmament program was such as to lead him to the conclusion that it was in preparation for war rather than for defense? Answer, no, he never did. Question, was Schacht ever quoted to you to this effect by any of your colleagues or by anybody else? Answer, no. Question, now after Keitel took over the position of Chief of the Wehrmacht, there were still meetings between Schacht and yourself with Keitel. Now after Keitel took over the position of Chief of the Wehrmacht, there were still meetings between Schacht and yourself with Keitel in place of Blomberg. Answer, yes. Question, did Schacht ever say anything at these meetings to indicate that except for the technical question of the financing through the Reichsbank directly, he was opposed to a further program of rearmament or opposed to the budget of the Wehrmacht? Answer, no, I don't think he ever did. Close quote. The defendant Goering has also confirmed this testimony. I refer the tribunal to the interrogation of Goering under date of 17 October 1945. This being United States Exhibit number 648. I read from the interrogation of Goering on 17 October 1945 from the lower half of the third page. Quote, question, I want to ask you this specifically. Was Schacht dismissed from the Reichsbank by Hitler for refusing to participate any further in the rearmament program? Answer, no, because of his utterly impossible attitude in this matter regarding this advance, which had no connection with the rearmament program. Close quote. Hitler dismissed Schacht from the Reichsbank on 20 January 1939. Without reading, I offer in evidence EC 398, United States Exhibit number 649, consisting merely of a brief note from Hitler to Schacht announcing this dismissal. From all the foregoing, it is clear that Schacht's dismissal in no sense reflected a parting of the ways with Hitler on account of proposed aggression. This fact may also be seen from EC 397, United States Exhibit number 650, consisting of Hitler's letter to Schacht under date of 19 January 1939, the text of which I wish to read. Quote, "On the occasion of your recall from office as President of the Reichsbank Directory, I take the opportunity to express to you my most sincere and warmest gratitude for the services which you have rendered repeatedly to Germany and to me personally in this capacity during long and difficult years. Your name, above all, will always be connected with the first epoch of the national rearmament. I am happy to be able to avail myself of your services for the solution of new tasks in your position as Reichsminister. In fact, Schacht continued as minister without portfolio until January 1943. I wish to conclude by saying that the evidence shows, first, Schacht's work was indispensable to Hitler's rise to power and to the rearmament of Germany. Second, Schacht personally was favorably disposed towards aggression and knew Hitler intended to and would break the peace. And third, Schacht retired from the scene for reasons wholly unrelated to the imminence of illegal aggression. So long as he remained in power, Schacht was working as eagerly for the preparation of aggressive war as any of his colleagues. He was, beyond any doubt, most effective and valuable in this connection. His assistance in the earlier phase of the conspiracy made their later crimes possible. His withdrawal from the scene reflected no moral feeling against the use of aggressive warfare as an instrument of national policy. He personally struggled to retain his position. By the time he lost it, he had already completed his task in the conspiracy, namely, to provide Hitler and his colleagues with the physical means and economic planning necessary to launch and maintain the aggression. We do not believe that having prepared the Wehrmacht for assault upon the world, he should now be permitted to find refuge in his loss of power before the blow was struck. This concludes our case against the defendant Schacht.